Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, this show where we talk about today's trends, issues, and news from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by Arlyne Diamond. We're going to be speaking about education in California and what might we do to reform it and make it a little bit more consumptive for the general population. So Arlyne, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get right into things. What actually got you interested in the topic of education and the state of the state?
I've always been interested in education, and I've been an educator. I've taught in various colleges and universities, so I get the aftermath, so to speak. Obviously, I also raise children, and I have friends that are K through 12 educators, including a cousin who's she's retired, a K through 12 principal. So it's been something that's been of importance to me, and I see it as being critical to the success of California and to the nation.
It absolutely is. In recent times, I've learned that if you look at a secondary education or post-secondary, if you look at college kinds of scenarios, we're hearing statistics that, for example, Cal State Hayward talked about nearly half of the students that come in as freshman students need remediation in things like math and English. And it's not like we're not spending money in California. It's about 40% of the state budget, is my understanding, that is dedicated to education. So how do we fix it? Do we just throw more money at it and hope for the best?
You know, everybody says let's throw more money at it. But, you know, if you look at the statistics over the past 10 years or so, I'm not exactly sure 10 years, but over the past group of years, we keep adding and adding and adding and adding money in the bucket. Mm-hmm. And that's not the answer. We have some very significant problems that we need to fix. And in order to fix them, in a sense, we have to stop being politically correct. Because some of those problems, and certainly not all, but some of those problems lie in the fact that even the very best of teachers in K through 12 education, even the very best of teachers, is having to deal with children who are in her classroom or his classroom that speak 23 different languages, mm-hmm. that come from all kinds of cultural backgrounds, that have parental support, don't have parental support, that have special learning needs, mm-hmm. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have this real belief in mainstreaming all of our kids. You used the word remedial before. One of my strongest beliefs is that we really, really need to help people get to where they can be mainstreamed rather than forcing them into a mainstream and then having everybody else be held back in that process. Mm-hmm. So that's only one piece of it, obviously. The other piece of it is the whole notion of tenure. It's extremely difficult to get rid of a bad teacher.
It is.
And so we have set up a system that doesn't reward merit and that allows for a decline in excellence, okay?
Sure.
And then I think there's a third issue, and the third issue is how we set up the compensation system for teachers. That if you look at the entire package, birth to death, so to speak, mm-hmm. teachers get a lot of money. Whole pension, retirement benefits kind of thing.
For people within the public system in a union school.
Right, yeah. Thank you for that clarification. They get a lot of money, but they don't get that money in their paycheck when they're starting out.
Right.
So what happens is when you're just job hunting, when you're newly licensed and credentialed, the high-tech community is much more attractive because it's going to offer you a lot more money in your paycheck, in your take-home pay. So one of the things I'd like to see happen is that we do more front-loading and less back-loading, so to speak. So we need to create a system for merits. We need to compensate teachers in a way that makes them want to go into teaching, the better ones. And then we need to look at how we can help the kids. Finally, if you look at the way money goes into the system, and this varies all over the state, so I'm not making a blanket statement, but significantly throughout the state, there's so much going into administration. There are layers and layers and layers of administration. And so not enough's coming into the classroom, per se.
And that's really where a lot of it's absorbed. It's absorbed in unfunded pension liabilities as well as the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And some of that bureaucracy is put into place because you have federal mandates and you have state mandates for doing the administration, keeping the records, and presenting information in a certain way. And in doing that, it takes people. And when you stack up all of those people, it does become more expensive.
There's so much, not just in education, but in any large bureaucratic organization, especially if they have government organizations or government contracted organizations. I've consulted to a number of government agencies, and the government accounting practices have so many checks and balances and redundancies built into them that it takes 10 people to open an envelope.
Yes.
So, we've got to cut out a lot of that.
Right. So what is the solution? We're starting to hear, like in Southern California, I think is one of the places where they're piloting consolidating some of the university systems. So, for example, they can handle the administrative components, payroll, human resources, etc., from a central location, which makes sense. If you can consolidate 10 schools or organizations into one set of staff, that reduces the overhead required, and possibly some of the real estate that might be necessary to house those people can be dedicated to students, etc. What do you see as a possibility?
Centralizing or outsourcing administrative functions can be very helpful. But then you have run into the issue, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you run into the issue of what happens when you centralize decision-making that should be localized.
Right.
So you've got to have some kind of a balance. But I think if you look at what's happening in the cities locally, where they're almost bankrupt and some of them are bankrupt, that's exactly what they're doing. They're partnering with other cities or with the sheriff's department for police services and with county for fire and things of that nature.
Maintenance for the playgrounds, etc.
Right. But a lot of that's it should be, I think, outsourced. Should go into the private sector and be a competitive bid. Which is one way of doing it.
And that's an uphill battle here in California for a lot of different reasons. So even in looking at the amount of money that's being put in, and we can talk about cutting costs all day long, but the question is, how do we improve the performance, not only of the teachers, and it's not just compensation, because many students...
It's motivation.
Many teachers, I mean, they don't go into it for the money. Not at least initially, and then when they start to build things up, it changes in some cases.
So let me tell you one horror story. I can tell you 10, but let me tell you one horror story. I was shadowing a principal in Southern California, shadowing a principal, and I would say things like, how can you let that teacher dress like that? Horrified. I mean, we're talking about way out of line kind of clothing. Or how do you let that teacher treat that child that way? And finally, the principal said to me, I've stopped correcting them. I used to correct them. And when I correct them, they file a grievance with the union. And it takes me 30-plus hours to prepare for the grievance hearing, and I lose anyway. So part of what's happened is we really have lost standards because there's no accountability. There's no way that you can say, you need to do this better.
Right.
And that's why one of the things I really, really want to see is for us to at least reward excellence. I don't think you can tackle the unions head on at this point in time and make major changes. But I think if we could create something that allows the outstanding teacher to be recognized, that provides incentive for other teachers to be competitive towards excellence.
Yes, and in talking to teachers and with all of the threats, whenever there's a shortage of money within the government, the first thing to be threatened are the teachers, the firefighters, and the police.
Sure.
And the reality is, though, that because of the tenure scenario, people that have been in the teaching profession for less time are excited about teaching, and they haven't been jaded. They have the newest techniques. They're the first ones to be let go.
That's right. It's last in, first out.
Right.
Because, again, it's fear.
It's the tenure scenario.
It's the tenure scenario, and it's fear. Because if you do an automatic last in, first out, you can't be accused of prejudice in any way, of discriminating. And so that's the safe way of doing it. Not the smart way, but the safe way. And that certainly is one of the problems. I think we, at some point, have to look at alternatives. We have to look and say, let's do some experimenting. Let's get out of the mainstream system to a certain extent and allow for different educational modalities to emerge.
Sure. And there are systems that allow that to happen. My wife is a Montessori teacher, for
I
example,
love Montessori.
and so one of the things that they do is they customize each of the individual programs. So math, somebody may excel in, and maybe writing is something that's a little bit more difficult. So they can custom tailor. And then there are things like charter schools, and there's homeschooling, and there are a lot of different things that are happening. But it seems that whenever those kinds of topics are brought up, or those alternative learning modalities or mechanisms or styles are introduced, that it's automatically a pushback, and we can't have that because the public schools will suffer.
Fear of change.
But also not a best interest of the children at heart necessarily. And we've heard about the teachers' unions recently saying it's about making sure that the benefits are there for their teachers, and the children are kind of secondary. And I'm not anti-union, but at the same time, we have to keep the needs of the children, I think, at the forefront.
Right, the children are the customer, and there's really very little that's directed directly to customer service, it seems.
But it goes beyond just the children as the customer. We're looking at society as the customer,
that's
right?
True.
And businesses can't get qualified workers here, and that we talk about all the jobs are outsourced to other countries where they actually
better education,
have better education. Yeah.
And more specialized education, which is also a double-edged sword. But the California Teachers Association is one of the most powerful unions in the country.
Sure.
And it has a stranglehold on us, frankly. I absolutely believe in collective bargaining. I absolutely believe in protecting the underdog and all that good unions do. But when they stifle the ability of teachers and even administrators, because CSEA at one point was a client of mine, when you stifle people from trying new things, from doing it differently, you talk about work out of class, for example. Oh, this is your parameter. Don't lift a finger to do something that's not part of what is in your job description.
Right.
We stifle incentive. We stifle creativity, and what we do most of all is we destroy motivation and morale. And so if you see somebody doing a mediocre job and consistently getting away with doing a mediocre job, and they're getting the same rewards as you don't really have incentive to do your best. You kind of unconsciously start to slack off some.
So what is your opinion of these alternative learning?
I think some are great. I think when homeschooling first started, there was a lot of fear.
Like in the caveman days?
Yeah,
or
like
you're
in
talking
the
more
caveman days.
recently?
Recently,
oh,
not
okay.
in the caveman days.
Because they were doing it way back then.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. That's where they started. They started it way back then.
There were no schools in the caveman days.
That's true. The recent iteration of it. I think, scared people, because the only people that we knew that were interested in homeschooling were people that were extremely religious and were very concerned to not have their children mainstreamed and taught these nasty things like evolution. And that was the start. And in the beginning, there was very little social support for the kids that were being homeschooled. And that concerned me deeply in those days, and I'm going back a ways. And then I started learning more about it and watching the evolution. It is phenomenal today that today there are all kinds of tools for the parent to teach.
Support
systems. There are all
systems.
kinds of support systems. There are all kinds of group activities
Sure.
for the kids to participate in. And it's a lovely, involved world. And I've met some young women who had been homeschooled, and the range of what they learned was phenomenal, because in this particular case, it was two daughters. Their mom would see what they were interested in and create curriculum around that particular interest, whatever it might have been. And so when these kids went to college, they were well ahead of their peers, their age group peers.
Right.
So it's become fantastic. It really has. Does that mean that every parent is a good homeschooler, teacher? No.
No.
Some of them are awful, I'm sure. Some of them you wish they weren't doing it. And the same thing's true with charter schools. They're good, bad, and ugly, and some of them are wonderful. I have some statistics that Lisa Snell at a Reason Foundation put together, showing that, generally speaking, charter schools are doing really well. Some are not doing so well. But they allow for choice. And for me personally, having choice is such a big thing. And I mean, that to me is what America's all about, is freedom to choose.
Right.
And so homeschooling, charter schools, typical traditional K through 12s, Montessori schools, whatever. Let's have a wide array, and let's let the parents of our children get educated in this array, you know, and pick what's best for their kids.
So what are your feelings on, for example, Montessori's are often private. The charter schools do have some sort of fee structure associated with them in many cases. How do you feel about vouchers? And
I love the idea of vouchers. Again, you know, we vote with our pocketbook. We vote with our dollar. And that's what the voucher does. If you get to pay for, voucher or otherwise, right?
Right.
If you get to pay for what you're getting, you're going to be a little bit more careful in terms of what you're buying. This concept of free.
But you're talking about accountability. That's crazy talk.
I know, it's a dirty word. It's a dirty word. You know it is. It's a dirty word. Yeah, I am talking about accountability.
Yes.
I'm talking about accountability. I'm talking about the fact that if people chose, over time, maybe not instantly, but over time, the cream would rise to the top,
right.
You know? And the better teachers would be selected more and more, and the better schools would be selected more and more.
But what about those poor underperforming schools who aren't getting the job done and aren't getting the results that the parents are looking for? What happens to them?
Let's help them.
How?
Let's help them. So this is kind of off topic, but I have really studied how we distribute welfare. I mean, I'm using that in a very broad sense. We're so busy helping this many people that we do very poorly in terms of actually helping the people that really need our help. I mean, look at the homeless kinds of things. That you have millions of millions, I exaggerate, but you have many homeless people on the street because we don't have enough shelters to provide for them, because we don't have medical attention to give them, many of whom really, really need it. They're down and out and need it. But I know college kids that are getting food stamps. I know college kids that are on welfare that could be working at
well, there are 43
places.
million people on food stamps right now, aren't there?
I don't know the numbers, but probably. But
record numbers.
Yeah, but to come back to the school model,
right?
That it's the same thing with how do you work with kids that have special needs. I think it's really important to do whatever it is we do well. That
again, you're talking performance, and that's not an even playing field when you talk that way, Arlyne.
I know, I'm just this idealist. What can I tell you, Chris? Just this crazy person with these ideas. But you know, if you're not spread so thin,
right,
then you have an opportunity to focus on what needs to be focused on and to really, really help it.
Right.
And we have neighborhoods that the average teacher doesn't want to teach in. There's no question about that. But we also have these extraordinary teachers who will opt to teach in those so-called bad schools because they want the challenge. But we don't, there really isn't a methodology whereby teachers get to choose along those lines very well. So, for example, okay, and again, in a public K through 12 setting, if you had a really bad neighborhood, maybe you incentivize your teacher by giving them a better compensation package to teach in those schools.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways you can do it. I certainly don't mean to say that only the elite should have good schools, and that,
no.
Yeah, our whole society benefits from educating our kids.
Okay, well, we haven't been anywhere near controversial enough yet. So in the last couple of minutes that we have, thoughts on some of the legislation that's coming through from the state level. For example, in the last a month or so, they rejected the ability to make it easier to fire teachers who were guilty of pedophilia or other issues, and that was happening at the state assembly level. Thoughts on that legislation?
I think it's terrible. I think I'm a real believer in a meritocracy. I'm a real believer in you get what your rewards, and if you let people get away with stuff, they get away with stuff.
Right.
The protection of the union is what allows for things like that. The union is so powerful that it lobbies to stay in a position to be able to protect whomever it chooses to protect.
Yes.
And we're doing our kids a great disservice.
Right. and people stay on the payroll that should actually be in jail.
Yeah, that would probably. Yeah.
These are issues that concern me and many other
But you're
parents that
raising
are out
children.
there. Yes.
You're raising young children.
Absolutely.
You don't know who's teaching your kids. Yeah.
Yeah. In my case, I do, but in many cases, people don't.
Yeah.
So, but we appreciate your time and sharing a little bit about your knowledge about the education system and some of your experience. We are going to take a quick break. If you'll just hold with us for just a moment, we'll hear a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum.
Say, well, I say I'm a constitutional law attorney. And they say, oh, really? What kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind. The kind that believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So let's come to this, my friends. You ready? The second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people. It is government versus the people. Am I right? Yes. Look at the Electoral College example. Right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
Welcome back to The Right Side. We are very thankful for our sponsors, or our underwriters, the Conservative Forum, for making this show possible. And this evening, we're graced with the president of the Conservative Forum's presence. This is Howard Myers. Howard, thanks for coming, and thanks for helping underwrite the show. Tell us a little bit about the Conservative Forum and what's coming next.
Thank you, Chris. It's my pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the fine job that you're doing and continue to do. Thanks. The Conservative Forum, real briefly, has been around for like 8 years, and it's basically a place for people to get together, exchange ideas, and listen to some great conservative speakers. And speaking of which, next month we're going to be having John Fund, who's a well-known author and writer. He was scheduled to be on the first Tuesday of the month, which we always like to have, but he's going to be at the Democratic National Convention.
And we're still allowing him to come to the Conservative?
I can't explain it, but his boss wants him there. You know, a guy has to earn a living, I guess. So we'll have him on the September 11th, the second Tuesday. It's going to be a special event. We expect a really good turnout because he's a very popular writer. October, we have someone we've had once before, Jesse Lee Peterson, and he announces himself as the conservative Jesse Jackson. Only he's got a lot more fire, and he's on the right side. Okay. And he really lights the place up. I love it. I'm really looking forward to seeing him again. November 6th is election night, and that's when our meeting is. And what we're going to have is the live TV with showing the election returns. might be turned to Fox News. And at the same time, it's also going to be, it's close to Veterans Day, it's going to be Veteran Appreciation Evening. So any veteran gets in free. And our guest speaker that night is John Caviani. He's a Medal of Honor recipient. So he's going to be our speaker talking about liberty and freedom. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've talked to him several times on the phone. I think he's going to be a great speaker. So that's going to be a heck of a night, one way or the other. That's in November. In December, we're going to have Armstrong and Getty at our Christmas get-together. So we're looking forward to that. January, we have next year we have January and April lined up. January is Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute. In April, we're going to have Bob David, who is from the Hillsdale College. This will be our third joint meeting with Hillsdale. We've had them for the last 2 years. It's been a very good turnout, and so we're. It's a continually great lineup. We look to fill next year with more great speakers, and we continue to grow. We're up to, over 600 members at this point. We expect to be 700 by the end of the year.
Great. Well, I'm one of those members, and I see tremendous value in all of the things that you do at the forum. So thank you for doing that. And in addition to the speaking, you also have. Do you still do the classes? You want to cover?
Well,
those?
we have the Constitution class, and we have other discussions, but the one that's the most consistent is the Constitution discussion group, and we just gave out two $1,000 scholarships for high school students. They gave wrote a composition on the constitutional principles.
So those evil baby-eating homophobic conservatives are giving money as incentives for education?
It is kind of strange, but especially but you got to try.
Crazy.
So anyway, I really think that's an excellent thing to do. And one of the things we have at all our meetings, we have tables available for whether it's a candidate or a grassroots organization, somebody wanted to promote the idea of getting petitions signed or ballot measure. These are available. There's no charge for the tables, only for the admission. And that's continues to be very popular. When you come in, all the networking, it's almost like a conservative carnival. It's just lovely. It's great just following it.
You're making us sound fun. Stop it, Howard. But thank you for your underwriting. We appreciate it. And in closing, we'd just like to remind you that, yes, conservatives do care about education. We care about reform, and there are a lot of things that need to be done at a state level as well as at a local level where we have some of our school districts at threat for being taken over by the state because of underperformance. So please, if you have an interest in educating the youth of our country, if you have an interest in a strong, vibrant business community, lower crime, etc., please hold your local officials that are accountable. Hold them accountable for the education of our kids. Our future and the security of the country depends on it. Thanks again for joining us on The Right Side. I'm Chris Pareja, and we appreciate your presence and hope to see you again sometime soon. Thanks for joining us.